Okay. Bev? All right, can everyone on Zoom hear us? Someone give a thumbs up. Yes, okay, they can hear us. Bev Tyler, everyone.
Well, good evening, and welcome to my grandfather's home. Without the ballroom that you're in. First, a quote from Walt Whitman, who basically wrote an article for one of the papers in New York City called Tear Down and Build Over. And for some reason, I don't have a quote. It starts out, as it's on there, goodbye old houses. There was a lot about the that I loved and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, I don't have the rest of it. I don't know why. Anyway, let's go on to number 2. Oh, I do it. Okay. There we go. November 1st, 1993, the colonial Samuel Hawkins House, 30 yards north of the intersection of Pond Path and Upper Sheep Pasture Road, was scheduled for demolition because of an error made by the town of Brookhaven Building Department. The house was within the Old Setauket Historic District Transition Zone, and the application for demolition should have gone through the town of Brookhaven's Historic District Advisory Committee. When the error was discovered by local resident David Selleck, a descendant of Samuel Hawkins, the Three Village Historical Society was able to get the bill to delay demolition. One of the earliest settlers of the area was Samuel Hawkins, son of Captain Eleazar Hawkins of Stony Brook. In 1747, Samuel, born 1721, died 1810, married Mary Green, moved into this house and soon constructed the 1750 Saltbox addition. Samuel and Mary raised 7 children, including Zophar Hawkins, who fought in the Revolutionary War, had a number of colorful adventures, and inherited the house and raised 6 children. And Zophar's memorial's brass plaque is right in front of his gravestone and is pictured there. Also, the genealogy of Samuel, his wife Mary Green, Zophar, and his wife Juliana Bayless, who are all buried in that cemetery, which is in along Pond Path in South Setauket. So not very far from where the house was. The house passed out of the Hawkins family in 1879. After a couple of other owners, the house passed to Polish immigrants, John and Matusky, who started a dairy farm, a nasta cake farm. And they raised 10 children in the house. 4 sons and a daughter fought bravely in World War II. One son, Anthony, was killed during the war and is honored by a memorial plaque on the Setauket Village Green that tells about him and 7 other men from Setauket who gave their lives during World War II. And the story the story is very interesting. On the night of August 5th, 1943, a patrol plane out of Trinidad Naval Base spotted a sub and made an attack on the sub, crash dived. The sub crash dived. The Mariner aircraft then kept the sub on radar contact all night, but it did not surface again. At dawn, the patrol plane running low on gas was replaced by Lieutenant A.R. Matusky. For 7.5 tedious hours, he plied back and forth and around a square of ocean, figuring how he would maneuver if he were a sub-skipper who had been down in so many hours in such currents as this and this kind of sea, and making his gambit accordingly. He was a boy who knew his business. At 13:21 hours, 1:21 p.m., Trinity Naval Base got a subcontact report from Matusky that giving latitude and longitude and adding, "I'm going to attack." 13:30, he radioed, "Some damage, bow out of the water, making only about 2 knots. 13:37, no casualties to plane or personnel. Then at 13:48, damage, I am on fire. And that was in the area which we now call the Bermuda Triangle. And nothing of his plane was ever found, but the sub was found with its bow sticking up out of the water, and it was summarily sunk by the Navy. The house was constructed, the Hawkins House, between 1720 and circa 1750 in its 2 main sections. And you can see the basic drawing of the salt box addition. The salt box is pictured there on the left. It's the part of the house on the right. And the salt box was drawn by an architect who was on site for the time we were taking the building apart.
We may have clicked.
Okay. The oldest part, as we were later to discover, is on the left. The salt box section was removed with the kitchen wing added. So the portion on the portion on the right is the original 1720 section. Okay, now you can see it. Now it's on the left. The part on the left is the oldest section, 1720. And it was also a salt box section, but that part of it was removed and this kitchen wing was added. Before that, of course, they had a summer kitchen, which was separated from the building. When the house was partially Victorianized, the rear retained its 6/6 19th century windows. When work started to take the house apart, the intact salt box section was thought to be the oldest part, but it was basically 1750. So 1720 was newer. In the front of the house, I'll go back. These windows that you see at the top in the dormers, they wanted these big windows. So they just simply cut through the main beam and left it just hanging and put the window in. So 100 years later, the house starts to go like this. So, but that's that's what happened. The entire interior of this section, walls and ceiling, this is the 1750 salt box section, were covered with sections of tongue and groove paneling. As it was uncovered, the timber frame corner post clearly shows its colonial heritage. The paneling was removed during initial investigation to assure that the house was worth saving. The second floor corner post shows the hand-hewn post and beam construction and bracing. This was a very well-built structure, which could have remained here another 250 years, assuming that they fixed a part in the middle that was cut through. Deconstruction of the house began on November 12th. Restoration carpenter Robert Barrett, that's him pictured, carefully removed the wide siding boards and the older window in the house directly above the siding. On Saturday, November 13th, the next day, work began on cabling the front of the house to support a few deteriorated beams and some unsympathetic dormer additions which had compromised the structure integrity, as I explained. Saturday, November 20th. Architectural historian, restoration carpenter Robert Barrett, Cy Robbins, myself, and a few other volunteers worked all week to get the house ready for the group of volunteers who were to arrive today. Barrett and Stevens did most of the work and completely stripped the walls and ceiling on this half of the house. The first task today was to remove the layers of roofing. This is Saturday, November 20th. The work progressed well, and the roofing was removed right down to the beams. By the end of the day, the roofing had been removed, both front and rear, as well as the more recent sister or helper beams, both front and rear. Beyond the roof line is one of the development houses that were built in the area. The same basic house style was to be built on this site once our work was done. You can see it in the background there. While most of it's concentrated on the circa 1750 section, John Stevens, that's him pictured there, the architect, began stripping the paneling off the east end. The photo is taken from inside the east end and shows the bracing cables in the west end. Stevens now discovered that the east half of the house probably dated to circa 1720. At this point, we just tried to save both halves of the house. We hadn't intended to at the beginning. We didn't think we would have time to actually save any beams, but the deadline was extended thanks to developer Richard Raskin and his partner, architect Jay McNulty. They were very, very nice to us, allowing us the time. They even extended it later. Sunday, November 21st. Today, all the west end roofing rafters were removed carefully and lowered to the ground. They were then neatly stacked and numbered for, we hoped later, reassembly. The walls were next. The rear salt box post and beam walls were the first to go. Some of the trunnels or wooden pegs holding the beams had to be drilled out. A block and tackle assisted to stabilizing and moving the beams. And the frame was lowered slowly down under the watchful eye of Robert Barrett. The second floor girt and beams were next, and each was carefully unpinned and lowered. As the shadows lengthened on Sunday, the east end was almost clear of roofing. With the help of SPLEA director Bob Mackay and other volunteers. Now we're at Monday, November 22nd, work resumed. The dormer is gone and the rafters are about to come down. The posts now all by themselves. Temporary supports are nailed on. Cables are attached. The west end wall is down as well. It's now Wednesday, November 24th. Tomorrow is Thanksgiving, a day off. Removing each ceiling beam is tender work. As each pin comes out, the weight of the beam becomes evident. Cy Robbins assisting. No more photos today, a slight accident. I was injured, my left hand. I'm left-handed. And it was bleeding. And I wrapped a towel around it, but it kept bleeding. So I realized I had to go. I was the one who'd taken the photographs. So I didn't want to get any blood on the car. So I rolled down the window and I drove home with my arm hanging out the door and the blood dripping down. And I got home and Barbara drove me to the hospital, went to Mather, and they fixed me up and I was back there the next day. No big deal. It's now Friday, November 26th. We discovered that architect John Stevens was working here yesterday and taking measurements as well. So he spent most of the day on Thanksgiving at the house working by himself, mostly taking measurements, but doing a lot of other piecework. The east end is next, 2 days to go. The roof rafters to the east end come down. 2 days meant that's all the time we were allowed because they were going to be building the house. The details of post and beam construction are beautiful to see. Now the girts are down, it's almost finished. Saturday, November 27th, we're storing the frame outside at Splea's Sherwood Jane Farm, now Preservation Long Island, thanks to Jim James and JPM Management. That's their truck and trailer. By noon, the frame is wrapped and stored on Splea's upper field. Saturday afternoon, back to the house for salvage archaeology under and around where the house was. And then at the South Setauket Hawkins Cemetery, grave marker for Zophyr Hawkins. The only one I can identify is Bill Manus on the left. And then lots of newspaper articles. And that was it. Did we save the house? No. We tried to get places, this 1993, we tried to get places to take the beams and nobody would. We couldn't get any storage. We couldn't get any money to do it. It stayed up on the field. The tarps all blew off. And it all rotted. So we didn't save the house. But we got the architectural drawings by John Stevens of the house. The entire set of drawings is now both part of the Historical Society archives and the archives at Preservation Long Island. So we have those. And we also have that barrel full of salvage archaeology that we got from underneath the house. That's part of the collection of the Historical Society as well. But it was quite a project. And we can't save everything. We shouldn't save everything. I don't know what we would have done if we'd have been able to store it inside, or how we would have, or where we would have put the frame up anyway. So that's just part of what happened or what didn't happen. So any questions?
Who owned the land?
Huh?
Who owned the land?
Well, originally the Hawkins family, and then it went through the Jasinski family, and then it was the last Jasinski relative. I'm sorry, Matusky, not Jasinski. Matusky relative. The last Matusky relative was living in a house that was not part of this piece of property, but was right next door. And we went and talked to her, and she, of course, was the sister of the guy who died in the Second World War. And she filled us in. I think we have a tape on her as part of the Historical Society. And she told us a story about the family and stuff like this. But she said that the rest of the property had been sold. She had sold it to the developer. And but she had no idea that the house could be saved or possibly deconstructed as it was. So it was just something that we need communication. I mean, the same thing happened to the business books for Delano Studio. The guy at Delano Studios knew me. And he knew the Historical Society, right down the street, right? Right down. And I came back from Oklahoma City after 12 weeks air traffic. And I went to Delano Studios because they were closing. And I asked him, I don't even remember his name now. I asked him, I said, you know, what can you give me? Do you have the books that were there? He said, oh no, I didn't think anybody wanted them. I threw them in the trash. So, but that's what happens. And a lot of stuff just gets thrown away. I'm not saying we're going to take everything in the Historical Society, but we at least have the ability to say yes or no about stuff. It would really be helpful, especially 20th century and 21st century items. We don't just collect Revolutionary War stuff. We collect right up through today, 21st century.
I have one little point, unless I'm wrong, you originally said, I think the site of the Hawkins House was Pond Path and Upper Sheep Pasture. It's actually Lower Sheep Pasture, is it not?
I'm sorry, yes it is. Did I say upper?
Yes, you're right.
Yeah, I'll have to correct that. I'm sorry, where were we?
I have a question. I noticed that there were no center chimneys on the house, which would be common in the 1720 or 1750 house. So was there evidence that the original chimneys had been removed? Your pictures show end chimneys.
I don't know. I don't know. You have to go to the architectural drawings. And I didn't bring them with me, or did you find anything in this?
I did look, I was just looking at the date search.
These are two copies of the information on the Hawkins house with all of the property information, and then you see all the articles written about it. Those are part, the Historical Society also has a copy. These are my copies. Also, the story of Lieutenant Matusky was right here. And also my article from 1993 honoring the house. Oops, sorry. I forgot about the,
Everyone at
I forgot
home.
about everyone else, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can see your daughter says, hi, Dad.
Yeah.
She's right there in the middle. If anyone else out on Zoom has a question or comment, feel free to enter it in the chat feature, which is a little button on the bottom, and we'll see your question pop up here and Bev will answer.
Anybody else here?
Thank you, Bev. I'm wondering if there's been a lot of wonderful preservation that's happened over the years that's been successful. And then this is the story of, one that didn't quite make it. Are there gaps, significant gaps in the funding mechanisms for different needs for preserving a house like this when it gets taken down? Like I've seen the barn is kind of sitting unstored. You know, is there not a funding mechanism that covers certain pieces of it?
Yes and no. A lot of this is, we don't get much into preservation in the historical society. That's not our bailiwick. That's more the bailiwick of Preservation Long Island and the Three Village Community Trust. But this time there was no community trust. So we just did the best we could. Cy Robbins was already going out every Monday with his crew to the Suffolk County Clerk's office and copying the deeds. That's how we got to all the deeds. Every single deed for every single piece of property in the Three Village area is in our computer base, every one of them. And copies of every deed. Copies of every deed up till about the year 2000 is also as part of our archives. Now, the deed list that's on our computer base is available. The deeds themselves, that's another problem because they're all paper copies. So they're not available, would never be available on the internet or anything like that. But that's as far as we go, as far as the buildings in the area. But knowledge of what needs to be preserved is one of the objects of the Preservation Long Island in Cold Spring Harbor. And they issue a endangered homes or properties every single year. They pick, there's too many to list them all. So they pick between 5 and 10 each year, and they list those as part of their effort to get them preserved. And some of them have been.
Some of them are probably in county holdings, I know that.
And
It's very expensive and it's very hard to maintain.
Oh, yeah. The Hawkins House in Yaphank is one that's owned by the county. The home in St. James, that great big thing that was part of one of the mayors of New York City. Yeah, that's Deep Wells. So there's a lot of others that are being handled by individuals, like a couple of the African-American homes, like out in Southampton, that have been preserved by people. But you and Steve and the other people in Suffolk County and New York State are much more open nowadays to this kind of thing than was happening in the 90s. So
there might be a gap in organizations that fund through grants to help preservation. There might be a gap. Sometimes they're not willing to cover administrative costs and other things, you know. So I was wondering if they don't cover storage of, you know, of building materials or something.
They might cover parts of the project.
Right.
You know, there are a lot of state-run organizations and that do provide funding for this sort of thing. But again, it's like, there's one grant for storage. There's one grant for just getting architectural drawings.
It's
Yeah.
piecemeal, yeah. Thank you.
somebody else back there had a question.
Anything over there?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you mentioned the salvage archaeologists. You know, I don't know anything about it. I'm saying, you know, as you're talking, I'm just sort of squirming, thinking, God, great stuff there. So I know that you had an August deadline, and
You just take a shovel and you dig in the ground and you pull out whatever you can. You don't worry about where it came from.
right. You don't worry about whether you're breaking something or anything like that.
That's right.
You grab what you can.
That's right.
Is that right?
We just had the rest of the morning.
How many volunteers worked on that project with you?
About 50. About 50 volunteers, especially on the weekends. They came out on Saturday. There were more people on the first day, Saturday. a lot of people on Sunday, some different. And then the following weekend, but not as many. But it was amazing what they did. Absolutely amazing.
And so the Historical Society has that, those items, or what did you?
Yes, they do. Yeah, it's part of the archives. Yeah. They weren't significant. They were just kitchen items and things like that. Some very small, broken kitchen items and things. Anybody else have any questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, wait, hold on. There was one, let's see. I can see it, it's a little bit blurry. So over here it says, what is the process? This is from Helen Vadianis. Yeah. What is the process for contacting the historical society? You might have something the society might be interested in acquiring. So
Try that again?
Yeah.
if someone, yeah, so we do, if everyone can hear me, we do have a collections policy. We are currently accepting items that are relevant to the Three Village area. We'll take things that are not relevant also, but we'll farm them out to the proper people, whether they're somewhere else on Long Island or off the island, or if you are okay with us selling it on your behalf, we can do that also. But you can, if you got an email from us about tonight's lecture, then you have our email address and you can respond and we'll talk offline.
Okay.
She is a member, yeah. Okay,
All right.
all right, thank you. Our next lecture is February 20th, and it's here at the Neighborhood House with Port Jefferson historian Mark Sternberg, and he's going to be talking about new resource documents that he uncovered about the Cooper Spiring. So, we're still finding out new things. Yeah, so that's February 20th, and we invite you all to come back. So thank you so much. Thank you, everyone at home.